College Alumni Association NOKELive series. These live events are being held weekly throughout the summer to include a mixture of webinars, film, and book discussions, and more. Please visit the Alumni Hub page on the Roanoke College website, www.roanoke.edu/alumni. My name is Elizabeth McClenny, and I'm the Director of Fintel Library. It's my pleasure today to host today's webinar. Before we begin our discussion, I want to cover a few logistic points. We would love to know who is viewing, so please let us know via the chat feature on YouTube. Also, please use the chat feature to present questions. We will attempt to cover as many questions and share brief stories with our presenters as possible. Today's session is being recorded and will be available on the Alumni Hub and this YouTube channel beginning tomorrow. For this event, we are joined by the children of the college's 8th president, Dr. Norm Fintel, and his beloved Joe Fintel. They are Trustee Peggy Horn, class of 1978, Dr. Bill Fintel, and Barbara Collins. At their father's bedside during a miraculous 9-month remission from stage 4 non-smoker lung cancer, Norm Fintel asked his daughter Barb to finish writing a message to the world he was leaving behind. His timeless wisdom is woven together with 34 life lessons as published work entitled Love Norm, a legacy for us all. Today we will hear from Barb initially as she presents what you did not know about Norm and Joe Fintel. Her siblings and Trustee Ken Belton, class of 1981, will join her once her presentation is complete. I am pleased to welcome Barb Collins. Barb, I will turn it over to you and start sharing.
Great. I am so happy to be here with all of you that knew and loved Joe and Norm. And I've got to say, not every brother would show up on his birthday. So thanks and happy birthday, Bill. Before our father was diagnosed with stage 4 non-smoker lung cancer, he'd been writing a book of life lessons for his grandchildren. He'd been writing that book for over 20 years. When life suddenly got short, he asked me to finish it and have no experience as an author, but I said, okay, Dad, but I was really thinking it may never get done and he will never know it. But what happened next filled me with such a sense of urgency that I dropped everything to write down and share what he wanted to say. In those final months, I realized I didn't know him as well as I thought I did. He was so much more than my father, an educator, or a college president. Larger forces were guiding his life. So thinking I can speak for him is really scary for me, and a full disclaimer, I may not get it all right. But I know my dad would have forgiven me, just as I know my mom would get after me until I made it right. So today, I want to share his message by telling the story of his life. We'll begin with what we knew, then what we didn't know and what I found out, and what Norm wanted to tell us, and then open it up for questions and discussion after that. When Dad was diagnosed, it was early 2016, and after a single dose of chemo nearly took him from us, immunotherapy or his sheer will to live put him into remission. He called those extra months his miracle, and he often wondered why he was still alive. The answer came as he witnessed the country and world start cracking at the seams, becoming so polarized. He started having nightmares, and I have no doubt that he felt the weight of the world on his shoulders. He didn't want to leave the world without first trying to save it. So he expanded that book into a message of hope for anyone. Then I dug into his files, and I found 400 lifetime writings. That's 470 speeches, sermons, poetry, and correspondence dating back to when he was in his early 20s. Most of these had never been seen before, even by my mom. And within them, the themes of his life emerged: equality, peace, and spreading love. 4 values guided his every step: honesty, integrity, truthfulness, and agape love. And spreading all of these was the mission of his life. Sharing his wisdom became his most potent medicine. And after turning off the recorder, he'd often say to me, "I feel better now." And then he'd want to play cards and he'd beat me every time. After Dad passed, my mom lived with me for 17 months. And she woke up every day asking, "Barb, is it done yet?" And in her final week, I got the final draft and read it to her. And 10 minutes after I read that final word, she passed holding my hand. I can only imagine that Joe was in a hurry to go and tell my dad that she'd gotten the book done. So let's begin by remembering what is common knowledge about Norm. He grew up in a farm in Nebraska, and he never really left that farm. I know many of you probably saw him pulling weeds by the sidewalks. He traded the fields for academia, and people seemed to become his most important crop. He was devoted to planting and nourishing seeds of our souls, and he quietly went about looking inside of us, seeing our potential and nudging us to become that best self. We knew he was a man of deep faith and came from a German Lutheran heritage. Mom was Norwegian Lutheran. Like Martin Luther, Dad's hero, he led by example. He had an insatiable quest for knowledge and truth, and he loved the accelerated learning in a one-room schoolhouse in Nebraska. He treasured the library card his mom gave to him as a boy, and he believed that educating students went far beyond textbooks to shaping them as leaders of the world. Then we have Joe, simply his best decision. She was a true partner both at home and at Roanoke College. I'm going to tell some Joe stories later in the presentation. So we knew that leadership, both personal and institutional, was a really subject that Norm thrived in. It flowed throughout all of his writings and into 2 published books. In his inaugural address at Roanoke, he urged, "Become all you can become for the sake of society." And that was a theme throughout all of his writings. He was a man of uncommon vision. I think Pastor Paul best described him as a visionary who could see past the ordinary and see the extraordinary. This is what he did for Roanoke College. One of his first steps was developing a mission statement and then a 15-year strategic vision, which came with a $25 million price tag. When he raised that, he went on to raise another $75 million to fulfill that vision for the college. So now let's turn to what I discovered buried in those 470 writings and how equality, peace, and spreading love became the common denominators of his life. There were some defining moments when unexpected doors opened and Dad walked right in with no fear. I asked him about that, and he said the Spirit always gave him confidence to face the unknown. I also asked him, when did equality become so important to him? He said he was 10 when he first observed different treatment for people with different colors of skin. He saw it with a Black family at a county fair in Nebraska and with a Hispanic family living across the railroad tracks in town. It unsettled him, and equality would become a mission for his life. He grew up reading Horatio Alger books, and he dreamed about rising up from poverty to become a millionaire. He also dreamed of becoming the President of the United States. But when he was 16, a pastor pulled him aside and encouraged him to go into the ministry. Dad wasn't sure about that, but it planted a seed. And at 16, he made the decision to stop dreaming about those millions and instead commit to living a servant life. Many of us knew that when he was 21, he bought 2 tickets in a hometown raffle and won an airplane and flight lessons. After 2 years of crop dusting and a lot of daredevil pilot stunts, he was flying to Wisconsin and decided to touch down in Iowa to visit a former high school coach who was teaching at Wartburg College. The coach tucked an admissions brochure into the side pocket of the plane. Norm flew home, traded that plane in for a blue convertible, and went to college at Wartburg. He blossomed in an academic environment. You can see that in the middle picture. He was the Wartburg Knight and rode a horse in the parade in that costume. When he graduated, he was enrolled in seminary, just like his pastor suggested. But right after the graduation ceremony, he was offered a job as the director of admissions and PR. And in a 10-minute decision, he accepted the job, withdrew from the seminary, rolled up his sleeves, and by 2 in the afternoon, he was working in his new office and told his parents they could go home. Can you imagine what his parents were thinking on that drive? So my parents met on a blind date, and Dad fell instantly head over heels in love, and Joe thought he was an intellectual snob, quoting the Bible and Shakespeare. Then she discovered that marrying a German Lutheran and not a Norwegian Lutheran was her ticket to freedom, that she could dance and drink and play cards and still get to heaven. They met and married in 6 months when they were 29. My mom didn't give us many hints about how she became a champion of the underdog, a rebel, a feminist, and probably the most empathetic person I've ever met. Some stories of her life give us clues. So when she was in 5th grade, her house was quiet in the morning, and she stepped out to get the paper, opened it, and on the front cover was a picture of her father being arrested for stealing a pig. This was during the Depression. During that night, her brothers were whisked off. She didn't get to say goodbye because the family could no longer afford them, and they went to neighboring farms. And her mother forbid all of the kids never to talk about this again. Then in high school, she was mercilessly teased for being skinny. She could never gain weight, and that teasing left some real deep scars. I personally have never been more proud of her when she was in her mid-20s and she had a career teaching 4th grade in Iowa. And she discovered that her brother, Paul, who taught at the same school, was making more money. So she marched into the next school board meeting and demanded equal pay, and they gave it to her. She went back to work to pay the bills when my dad was working on his doctorate. In a job interview, there was a doubting principal who asked her what possible qualifications a small town Iowa teacher could offer troubled inner city kids. She said, "I can give them love." And she was hired, and she and Dad were experts in giving and receiving love. So when my parents had 3 kids under 2, I was 9 days old, Bill 1, Peggy 2. They moved into graduate student housing at the University of Wisconsin, and Dad worked on his master's. The topic of his research is one of the most shocking things I didn't know about him. He was 34, and racial tension was building up around the country and in nearby Chicago. Whites were flocking to the safety of the suburbs, and steps were being taken to hem blacks into certain neighborhoods. One of them on the south side of Chicago was known as the Black Belt. This brewing injustice disturbed my father so much that he drove to Chicago, parked on Michigan Avenue in the Black Belt, and interviewed anyone who would talk to him, police officers, ministers, even the founders of Ebony magazine. He wanted to know if the church was doing enough to counter the growing racism, and he found that the church was falling down miserably. He predicted that Chicago and the major cities were ripe for uprising, And this was back in 1959. So after he got his master's, he accepted a job in Minneapolis as the director of college education for the American Lutheran Church headquarters. He was responsible for evaluating how effective presidents, executives, and boards were for all of the Lutheran colleges. He traveled 60 to 70% of his time. We moved to an idyllic suburb called Golden Valley because he couldn't afford to buy a home in the city. Golden Valley was safe, and it was also lily white. By the mid-60s, Dad once again witnessed white people flocking to the suburbs as racial tension heightened in inner city Minneapolis and across the country. Peggy, Bill, and I in this photo were 10, 9, and 8 when he made a really courageous decision, and he moved us from that suburb into the inner city because he believed that if you wanted to be part of the solution, you had to go to the heart of the problem to help. I remember being 8 on my first day at my new school in 3rd grade. Diane Green put a note on my desk asking me to meet her on the playground after school to fight. And I remember showing up and she didn't. And we became good friends the next day. For Peg, Bill, and I, this move had lasting implications in our belief in our own life paths. And I wonder today, looking at this map, what Norm is thinking 55 years later when George Floyd was killed in this very same neighborhood of our childhood. It just can't be a coincidence. I think my dad is telling us we have work to do. A few years later, during a family vacation, which my brother says meant driving long distances, sleeping 3 in the back seat of the car, and eating bologna sandwiches, we passed through Memphis the same day Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated. And a few days later in Louisiana, our laundry had piled up. My parents refused to enter a whites-only laundromat. It took 3 times to find one that allowed Blacks. And that Sunday, they also took us to worship with a Black congregation. It wasn't long after Dad got his doctorate that Roanoke College came knocking on his door. It was his chance to see if all he learned at the American Lutheran Church really worked. And I think we'd all agree that it did. But instead of talking about his many accomplishments as president, I would like to stay focused on what he was doing in his greater life mission, the equality, peace, and spreading love. Dad had an open door policy for some of the first Black students. Several were recruited by Coach Green, and they would go on to be legends, never losing a basketball game and becoming leaders on campus and beyond. Ken Belton is one of those. He now sits on the board, and he's with us to share his Joe and Norm story. So we'll turn it over to Ken.
Well, thank you for just this opportunity to share a few thoughts about Dr. Fintel and Joe and Fintel. I certainly am humbled and honored to have this privilege to do so. So I really want to thank you for this opportunity. And I also wanted to thank Peggy and Bill for sharing him with us. You know, when I began reading the book, I naturally looked at the scripture verse from Genesis, I believe it's 8:22. While the earth remains, seed, time, and harvest, cold and heat, and summer and winter, and day and night shall never cease. I never realized at the time that Dr. Fintel was sowing seeds into each one of us and into our lives. He was taking time to encourage us and to let us grow. And he was rejoicing in the times that we reached a harvest where he could see what we were doing in our lives and how we became citizens in our world today. Many of you know the story about when the 4 horsemen arrived at Roanoke College in late 70s, 77. It was a time shortly after the civil rights movement and racial injustice was taking place. Well, we knew that we had our coach, Ed Green, and our assistant coach, Mike Parrish, individuals we could trust. But later when we arrived on campus, and as I mentioned, it was only 6 Black males and 2 Black females on campus, we were wondering who else could we trust on campus. And it was at that time that Dr. Fintel intentionally established a personal relationship with each one of us that led us to believe that we could trust him. Now, you asked a few questions about what we knew and what we didn't know about him and what Norm wanted to tell us. It was about 1 month before he passed away that I think that you remember that we had the opportunity to video Dr. Fintel and Joe Fintel. And it was at that time that we had a chance to sit and talk a little bit more about his background and about his history. It was at that time that I found out his passion that he had for racial injustice. I never knew that he had that type of passion because it was just so natural for him to be caring and concerned about everyone, but particularly giving us that opportunity and chance. A few days later, I set up a conference call with Dr. Fintel and Joe Fintel and you. And on that conference call, it was Coach Ed Green and Mike Stiles and Mike Baker and Bruce Hembrick and Gerald Holmes, Tony Bond, Donnie Morris, James Penix, and Roger Peterson. It was at that time I really learned the impact that he had on our lives. I heard stories from each one of them that I'd never heard, that Dr. Fintel did. I heard stories from Coach Green that just said, hey, he gave me an opportunity to be the head coach, an opportunity to be the athletic director that I never dreamed that I would ever have. I heard Mike Stiles and Bruce thank Dr. Fintel for the day that we established, we had an appointment with him when basketball season was over with, our senior year. We went into his office and we told him we were looking for jobs our senior year. And while we sat in the office, he made several phone calls to alumni, giving us opportunities to interview and set up appointments to go visit them. I heard stories from Gerald Holmes and Angelo Hardy to say that if it wasn't for Dr. Fintel, who gave them a second chance, who knows, maybe a third and fourth chance to be there at the college, he stepped right in to help them out. I heard stories from James Penix, who talked about that when he graduated, he worked for the post office and how he would stop by the president's house and Joe Fintel would give him lemonade and tea and things like that to drink. And stories from Mike Baker, who said that one summer he worked at the president's house just to make some extra money before he went home. And every day he would go to trim some bushes or pull some weeds, and Joe Fintel would tell him, no, Mike, don't do that. It's too hot out there. Sit down and have some cookies and lemonade. Those were the type of people that made a difference in our lives. So in those conversations, I learned something special about them. And it was a common theme, which was relationship. They intentionally established the relationship. And if they saw us on campus, they would intentionally walk over to see us. We didn't go to them. He intentionally came to see us. He knew everything about us. He knew our strengths. He knew our weaknesses. He knew what to do to motivate us, to encourage us. He gave us confidence in knowing who we were and what we could do. He wanted to tell us that we could do better and that we could be anything that we wanted to be. And finally, I would say one common thread was that you spoke of, that the Spirit led him to do the things that he thought were challenging, thought that it was impossible to do. He planted that Spirit within us. And so what I learned was that the Spirit is not just tangible, it's transferable. And he transferred that same Spirit into us to help us to believe that we could be anything that we could possibly be within our lives. And the final thing that I wanted to say was the common thread, the common theme among all of those guys that I mentioned was he changed our lives. He changed our lives while we were in school. He changed our lives for when we graduated. Even when we would go back and we would see him, he still imparted wisdom and knowledge into our lives. So he was a life changer in some.
Barb, you'll want to unmute yourself.
All right, is that better? My dad made waves when he resigned from a Roanoke Dinner Club after a college trustee who happened to be Jewish was denied membership. The club later reversed that policy and Dad would later return. The students respected him for making a moral, tough decision, and Sig Davidson became a lifelong friend. And Dad had called him a brother. And last year I saw Sig and he brought his copy of Love Norm to me, asking me to sign it because Dad was his lifelong best friend too. So Dad's vision globally is of a peaceful world, and it became more clear to him at the end of the presidency on a trip to Germany the year before the wall was taken down. He traveled through Germany, Russia, and Finland with college leaders to bring home ideas for building global awareness into the college curriculum. He saw people everywhere were yearning for the same things, peace, freedom, and love, and for upholding values necessary for societies to thrive: honesty, truthfulness, and integrity. These were all his big ticket items. He came back and he told the trustees that if students had a better understanding of our world as one world, we would be able to expand peace and shrink warring capabilities. So this global vision kept expanding after he retired. And at age 73, a door opened and my parents quickly packed their suitcases and left for Tanzania, literally overnight. I remember feeling shocked. One night at choir practice at College Lutheran Church, my mom met Pastor Anna and told her she wanted to visit her country. This was at 9:30 at night. And the first thing when my dad woke up, he had an email from the Lutheran bishop in Tanzania inviting them to visit and exploring ways Dad could help in their work. Before they came home the third time, he wrote a book on leadership to guide them after he was gone. And then this is when my mom cut her hair super short and never changed it. And now Peggy's taken over that role. What I didn't know was that Norm had been watching as thousands and thousands of people and Maasais were joining the Lutheran Church in Tanzania, while Lutheran Church membership in the US was dropping like rocks. So he went to study their success and he came home and wrote a letter to the ELCA bishop of what the church needed to be doing, what they were doing in Tanzania, that they were doing right. So this brings us to his message. During his remission, my dad was increasingly anxious about the unrest in the world. With his gift of vision, he must have sensed that tidal wave that was coming. For me today, I see a world that has lost its compass. And for me, the example of my father's life can point us back to north again. His message plants seeds of everlasting hope that we're all craving. He's giving us the tools to be effective leaders of our lives, and he's asking us to be guardians of the world around us. His message is asking us to work together for equality, peace, and love of all humankind. And I see Love Norm as a roadmap for carrying on that legacy. So what can one person do? He made it look so easy and simple. But we should ask ourselves, have we discovered our true life mission? What is it we were meant to do? And are you living that best version of yourself? We should ask ourselves, do we live by a code of values? And are we living them every day and taking them wherever we go? In the long checkout line at Walmart, or behind a slow driver in the left lane, or when your neighbor is ranting about politics, when you see an injustice based on the color of someone's skin, then live to serve and serve another and another. In Dad's words, we cannot stand idly by. These are action times. And one by one is how we change the world. So Hiram Belt is an example of one by one. He was 5 when I met him, 8 when my parents met him, and last year he came to Roanoke and received the Presidential Academic Scholarship. His mom is from Costa Rica originally and became a US citizen in 2010, and Catalina is here to tell her Norm and Joe's story. Welcome, Catalina.
Hi, thank you for the opportunity. I'm very grateful to be part of this and to be able to meet Norm and Joe. I call them like that because that was the way that they want me to call them, and not Mr. Fintel or Miss Fintel. They wanted to always to call them Joe or Norm. Reading this book, Barbara, it really touched me because every step of your story, it brings me back to my own experience by working for them. I used to clean their house, and they were always warm, inviting, kind, sincere, generous. They always make me feel like I was part of their family. They always ask me how Hiram is doing. They always ask me and always instilled a passion for Roanoke College from a young age. So sometimes I didn't have somebody to take care of Hiram while for example, in summer. So they would allow me to take him while I was working to their house. And so as Mr. Belton mentioned, the cookies and lemonade, it brings me back to see Hiram eating cookies but with milk while I was cleaning their house. Joe was very loving and funny person that really touched our life. Every time I come into their house, I open the garage door, and the first thing I see always, it was Norm's picture of when he was president in Roanoke College. So by them always telling me Hiram needs to go to college, what are his goals, how he's going to school, how he's doing here and there, they put in my mind that somehow inside of me and my heart, I want Hiram to go to that college. But that was 11 years ago, and I'm like thinking, I was struggling by then, and I'm thinking, I don't wanna have the doubt of he's not gonna be able to go to college, but the faith that they implant in me that everything is possible. So every time I open the garage, I see that sign in there, and I'm like, every time thinking, Hiram College, Roanoke, Hiram College, Roanoke. So right now my son is in Roanoke College. He's gonna be a sophomore now. He's happy as I cannot describe. He is doing very good. He's going to go for public health, and somehow is about helping people too. And I see his Norm legacy through HIRAM's life now. Joe and Norm helped me with a personal loan to purchase a car. And that's the car my son is driving now. That's the car that my son drives to college. That's the car. So for me, there is always a connection of them just by me working, by cleaning their house. It is so powerful for me and grateful to be part of their life, because they plant lots of seeds that now I'm passing to my son. I wish my son was here. He's traveling right now to North Carolina, but he brought, I told him, just write me some adjectives about them. So he brought faithful, humorous, generous, sincere, sympathetic, loving, compassionate, sociable, warm-hearted, thoughtful, considerate, wise, welcoming, family-orientated. All of these things were written by my son. And so we cannot be more grateful. Again, me reading the book, there is something that really stand out. And it was about agape love. I don't know if I'm pronouncing good that word. Agape love. And I didn't know what that means, but I look in Google, and it means agape love. It means the highest form of love, charity, the love of God for men and of men for God. So that was them. Every time I go to their house and I have maybe a load on my shoulders of what was going on in my life, and they somehow take those loads out of my shoulders, because they were always wanted to ask how I'm doing, how is HIRAM. And so I feel wonderful. It was wonderful. So another part of the book that caught my attention was from Bill, that my brother Bill sums it up well, saying, he taught me to never consider myself the most important person in the room, even if I'm alone. And that's what they did to me. They actually make me feel important all the time. So
Thank you so much, Catalina, for being with us today.
thank you.
So Peggy and Bill will now share stories that I've missed and that were probably really important. What do you think, Peggy? Should we let the birthday boy go first?
Absolutely.
So I'm on. Hi, this is Bill. 63 years ago, Joe and Norm brought their favorite kid into the world. Hi. So first of all, thank you, Barb. And thank you, Kenny and Catalina. I've been writing little notes as I've been listening. This is a flood of thoughts coming through. I think we'll start with one, and this is kind of childhood level, Golden Valley, thinking back to what we were being taught, and only now as an adult does it make sense. But I remember for sure that the N word was dirtier than the F word. And so that was a long time ago. With that, you get your mouth washed out with soap, and I don't mean figuratively, literally. So racial injustice was instilled in me when I was probably could hardly ride a bike. I remember telling that to a birthday present of mine. I called David Randolph my birthday present in 1989, black radiation oncologist who lights up the room wherever he goes. But I remember thinking, he was one of 13 kids, Charlotte Courthouse, Virginia, became a doctor. I was the son of a teacher and a college president, and I became a doctor. And I thought, my story is just not very interesting compared to him. I had all these advantages of having Norm and Joe as parents, and Peg and Barb, I'm sure you're feeling and thinking the same thing, is how did we get Norm and Joe to be parents? Next thought is the second best title for Barb's book is mine, and that's Leaving Golden Valley. I thought that should be the title of this book. Hers is better, but who takes their kids out of Golden Valley and moves them to South Minneapolis? Not that it was a site of a racial hotbed then, and I know it kind of is now, but still, he took us out of the suburbs and moved to the cities. And who takes their kids on spring break? And I'm pretty sure that Black Baptist church we went to, I'm pretty sure that was Easter. And do you suppose that's happened somewhere before, where two parents bring their three little kids into a church where everybody's not your color and sits down and says, hey, happy Easter. I'm here to celebrate the resurrection with you. So here you are 10 years old and you're being taught lessons like that. It's amazing. So I'm looking then as adulthood, and here's just another message that I'll add on to what Kenny was saying about being taught to be special in your workplace. He taught me servant leadership and leading from behind, meaning it's one thing to pull people along behind you when you're trying to get something changed. Dad taught me he probably didn't make it up, but he taught it to me. You can lead just as effectively from behind as you can from in front. Stand for something, make small changes, be willing to be patient. And then when somebody else makes that move that you suggested, you can just smile and let them think they thought of it. That was just the normism. One other thought I'll give to you was that the cookies and lemonade thing, I'm pretty sure I didn't get those till I did go pull weeds and work out in the yard. So you guys got lucky, you got them without working. And I'll turn it over to Sister Peg. Thank you.
Yeah, Bill, I definitely remember, I think the thing that I remember the most about Dad is that he never said a bad word about anybody. I mean, that was not the case with Mom. She was the spice in life, and he was the one who kept us all in line. And he also never actually told me what I should do. It was always because of how he was, he made you do it without telling you to do it. Like, I don't remember having a curfew growing up. But I never came in late. I think just expectations, right? He just expected you to do the right thing. And like Ken, I don't think he was trying to tell you what to do. He just led by example, like what you said, Bill. I think the one story in my life that I remember most vividly thinking about Mom and Dad was I'd moved to California to take a new job. And the person that I was interviewing with, or that I was going to work for, told me that I was the most naive person he'd ever met. And I said, you haven't met my dad. Because then you'd know, because Dad thinks you believe in everybody. You trust, and when you trust, you earn trust. It can't be, I'm going to wait for you to do something for me to trust. It's, I trust you. Go do it. So Dad was definitely the light, and Mom was the one who gave all of us a little bit of rebellion, right? That it's okay to rebel. It's okay to say the things, to be honest in terms of how you deal with people. And as long as you're doing that from a place of love, that was the right thing to do. Is that good enough, Barb?
That's perfect, Peggy. Both of you added things that were really important in our upbringing. And I relate to that curfew story because I followed that with my girls. It didn't always really work out for me as well as it did with us, but I did try that lesson of a parenting on a long leash. So.
Barb, if we could, we have a few comments that have come in. Could we share those, please?
Please.
So the first one is from Oscar Bolaños, who's very proud of his daughter Catalina and is also very proud of his grandson Hiram and sends love to you both.
Oh,
From Dr. Deneen Evans, we have special thanks to your parents for modeling humility to the African American students of the 80s. And from Cecilia Stoutmeyer, she loved Bill's words and sends happy birthday from Celie and daughter Eva. We also have a few questions, if you would not mind. We have a few
Sure.
minutes before we need to end, so would you mind if we asked a few questions?
we'd love it.
Okay. One of the first questions that we'd like to ask is, you talk about early in the book, there's a question of reflection that says, not regretting walking through open doors. Can you share with us, Barb or Peggy or Bill, the door that you were afraid to walk through, but you actually ended up doing it?
Oh, wow, there's a lot in my life. My parents taught me to be fairly fearless, but there are some doors that are definitely harder to walk through. For me, it's probably, I had 3 spine operations in 7 months back when I was about 32. And my life was in upheaval. I couldn't work, couldn't predict how I felt every day. And I had to figure out, it took me a long time, but I had to figure out what new door I was going to walk into a new life. And it turned out that my father's guidance and learning osmosis through him was to step into the nonprofit world and embrace it. It gave me the strength to chase down my fear of how I was going to live every day and to find joy and keep finding that happiness and following what it was that I could do that was giving that to me. So that to me was my biggest door to figure out. And I think they gave me the strength to walk through and the faith to walk through and figure it out, that knowing I could figure out. It did take me 19 years, but I did figure it out. How about you, Peg or Bill?
Just one thing real quick, I think. So I think when I was a freshman in college, I went to St. Olaf, which was just not where I needed to be. It's a great Lutheran college, the epitome of Lutheran colleges, you could say at the time. We'd been there every year at Christmas for the Christmas concerts. Everybody at the school was either valedictorian or salutatorian. It was the place to go to college if you were a Lutheran. And I hated it. And that was I thought it was something wrong with me, right? That I just never felt good there. I left 8 weeks into my sophomore year. I finally figured out it wasn't me. It just wasn't the right place for me. And I went to the University of Minnesota for 2 quarters and loved it there. It was big, anonymous. I could disappear. But I came out to visit mom and dad and went to summer school at Roanoke College, and that changed my life. And it was really what I learned was that you make decisions along the way about what you're gonna do day by day. And sometimes the door opens and it isn't hard to walk through it, you just run through it. And Roanoke College was that for me.
Hey, Barb. So I was just thinking about the other question of what I think Norm would say about the world today. And I think he'd point out 2 things. One is that you're not better than the next person, and quit calling everybody else names. He just hated name calling, bully-like behavior. So we're all made in God's image. we're all part of a human race. Granted, we're completely different. You know, German, Lutheran, you know, Catalina's from Costa Rica, Kenny's got his own background, but God loves all of us. We're all equal in his eyes. And I think, if maybe it's my message to the world, but just quit calling each other's names. Arguing with my facts and my logic, I don't mind. But if you call me a name first and then argue with me, I'm not going to listen. And Dad was, can you ever remember him calling somebody a name or a derogatory term of any stripe? I just don't remember.
No, he was a no judgment man, and I strive for that every day. I mean, that is one of the hardest things, but I think Dad would say, there's nothing new under the sun. It's not good, but these evil and good forces have been around since the beginning of time, and he would take a step back and he would listen without judgment, and he would seek opinions and track down the truth. I think he'd be really disturbed right now trying to find the truth in the media. And he would keep our sights set on the big vision that we can share. Where do we all agree? And for him, it was that we were free, we were equal, that we need the world to be peaceful, to be sustainable. We need to live in harmony, and we need to spread kindness and love. We need to be the golden rule. And that's what he did every day. One thing he taught me that I have found extremely helpful, probably the most important thing, was every morning, well, every night, he would go to bed knowing he was forgiven. So he could let it go, what didn't get right, what he should have been doing. And every morning was a new day to start over, know you're forgiven, and to keep on that path to truth and justice. He believed that we're all citizens of this country. We all get a vote, and it's up to us to pick the leaders we want. He was not, he swayed Republican, but he was a judge that could sit in the middle and see all sides. And I think we have to get to that middle. Anyway, it's a long answer, but I think Dad would want us to think about those things.
So Barb and all, we have about 5 minutes left, and there's one last question before we wrap up, if you would not mind. So this is coming in from Becky Wood. And first she says, what a wonderful presentation, homage on the Fintel legacy. I'm wondering, now that the book is done, elder care for now is over, what next? She's in awe of you for doing this, and what an amazing thing to take on and complete. And she says, love you, Barb.
So she's asking what's next for me, or, okay. So Becky, I'm so glad you're on this call. I met Becky in my senior year of high school. My parents moved me in the middle of the senior year, and she was one of my first friends at Andrew Lewis. And she lived on, I forgot the street name that Olin Hall is on down that way. So what's next for me, I'm moving on to the book that I really wanted to write before Dad asked me to write his book. And it's helping people with chronic pain find solutions for living with joy and happiness and purpose. And I'm actually giving a TED Talk on it in Greenville in South Carolina, which has been postponed from April to September. Now it's November. But that's my next venture. And I'm trying to figure out how we can all spread this book and my dad's message. We got to pass it on. If anyone has connections, let's pass it on and open up the world. And it's so full of wisdom. So I'm spreading that, Becky, and I'm trying to get motivated for another book. And I'm so glad you're on this call. I've missed you.
Thank you. What I'd like to do now is wrap up and thank you all for participating in the discussion this morning. I think it was heartwarming. It reminds us of what Roanoke College is, what your father and mother's legacy is. And for those of us that have been listening, we hope that you'll join us for each of our NOKELive events this summer. Again, visit www.roanoke.edu/alumni for more information. We'll wrap up the July series with a fun event to explore 3 movies with our Outdoor Adventures program on Tuesday evening, July 28th. Thank you so much for being here today.